Well, I'm glad you were here. We were going to finish the series today, but psych, we're not, all right? Because today I want to start a conversation that cannot be done in a tweet. It cannot be done in a thread of tweets. It's going to take a little bit more than one Sunday for me. I tried really hard to get it down, but then I realized this isn't elementary school. You all are grad students, and you want the meat, right? And so I'm like, I'm going to just bring it, and we're going to get into it together. And so how about we not rush for one time? What if Sunday mornings could be a space that is countercultural to how we always live, which is, oh, my God, I got things to do. I got to rush here. I got to rush here. What if we actually came in here and we're like, time doesn't exist in here, all right? Because we're outside of time in here. And so if you notice, I don't wear a watch anymore. It's gone, all right? So now I know when I need to shut it down. The Spirit will tell me, all right? All right. So here's what I want to do. Let's start this today. I'll cut it in half again like we did last week, and then we'll come back next week. So if you don't get what you need this morning, you can come back next week, and we'll try to make some more sense of this, all right? Today in this series, Jesus Saves, a post-evangelical reframing of salvation, I want to ask like the ultimate question, all right? I want to ask this question. Is Jesus the only way? Is Jesus the only way? Now, because some of you are like, well, so yes or no. All right, before we get there, all right, I want to go to the proof text that many people, specifically Christians, specifically evangelicals, use for their argument that Jesus is the only way. It's found in the book of John. John itself is a massive book that is so different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke, even though it's a part of the Gospels. My opinion, I think it's because it's written much later, it's a very mystical book. A lot of the mystics really appreciate John because I think there's so much depth that most people, if you try to literalize everything John says, becomes real complicated, all right? So I want to go to that proof text, and what we'll do over the course of this Sunday and next Sunday is we will try to place this verse, this proof text that's used that says Jesus is the only way, we'll try to place it in its context. One of the things I love to do, it's what makes me come alive, and I think you appreciate it as well, is trying to get some historical context around what is happening when this phrase that we're about to read is used. And then, like, what is John or this Johannine community or these writers in the book of John, what are they trying to do around this idea? What is the point of it, and what's the larger context? So that's where I want to go with it today. I will tell you this. This particular text is John 14:6. I'm going to read the entire passage, but this won't be on the screen. But just in case you're here and you're like, what do you mean? Here's the verse that maybe perhaps you've heard before. I'm just going to say it to you, and you can just nod your head and tell me if you've heard this. Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except, and what does it say? Let's make sure we got it right, through me. All right? Now, how many of you, just lift your hand up if you've heard this verse before? Okay. How many of you have heard this verse as the proof text that has been used to exclude everyone who aren't Christians? Yep. How many of you are glad that you were born where you were born, believe what you believe, because you were lucky enough to be a part of the way? But everybody else who didn't get what you got are not a part of the way. John 14:6 has been used by Christians, by evangelicals specifically, as a proof text that all Jews, all Muslims, all Hindus, all Buddhists, all atheists, all agnostics, any other religion or non-religion, this is the ultimate text to show that any religion that doesn't come through the door of Jesus is going to spend eternity in hell. Now, if you've been around Vinings Lake long enough, you know, there's lots of problems with that. First, there isn't a hell. Okay? And if you're new here and you're like, yeah, and when I say there is a hell, that isn't just me like making a statement. Like it's not in the Bible, all right? And if you're here and you're like, whoa, what? Whole series we did on the afterlife. If you want to go back there, you can. Want to encourage you to do that. The word hell can't be found there. It's a translation. They translated the word hell. That's a whole nother sermon. But I would just say to you, I believe in a literal hell, but I do not believe in like hell as an eternal place of torment and consciousness forever and ever and ever, okay? That is the antithesis to any sense of justice. And if God is a God of justice, if God is just, then those things aren't compatible together, all right? So that's a whole thing, all right? That's a side note. The other part of it, too, is I saw recently someone tweet or a shirt or somebody say this, but I think it's true. We can do all things by ripping a verse right out of context, right? And it's interesting to me how evangelicals, and again, I use them because that's the mothership that I came from, we used to just take this, I mean, literally it's one verse of so much that's happening, and we'll just take it and pull it right out. And it is the ultimate proof text to be like, oh, you're Muslim? Boom, you're going to hell. Why? Because the Bible says no one comes to the Father but through Jesus. Boom, you're in. All right, now, let me just say a couple things before we get into kind of making sense of all this. And I think maybe to help you. Oftentimes, when people use this particular verse, John 14:6, as kind of a proof text that everyone else is going to hell, what they're really, really trying to do, now this is my observation of it, all right? You can argue this or against this if you'd like, but I think a lot of people, what they're really saying is, when they say Jesus is the only way, they don't really mean Jesus is the only way. What they really mean is, my beliefs about Jesus are the only way. Okay? When people use John 14:6, what they really are saying is, anyone who doesn't believe in Jesus the way I believe in Jesus aren't going to heaven. All right? And I love what Brian McLaren. Brian McLaren's a friend of mine. He's been to Vinings Lake a few times. I love Brian McLaren. He actually wrote a book actually entitled, Is Jesus the Only Way? You can't buy it in like Amazon. And I think a part of it, he said he was writing it to fit into another book he wrote, The Great Spiritual Migration, but it didn't fit. And so he threw it on his website. And it's just like a digital book. So if you actually want to go in depth in this passage, I couldn't point you to a better source than what McLaren writes about this. And it's really easy. It's like a digital format. I think it's like 30, 40 pages. You can go there, and it's fantastic the way he writes about this. I also wonder if Brian was here like, did you do that because you didn't want to write a book publicly because you knew it was a bit controversial? But that's not really Brian's style. He's pretty good about jumping in it, but it's fantastic, all right? Brian McLaren said this. I love this. So let's just go ahead and get into this and just get like, this is just an appetizer this morning, all right? So let me give you just give you this app right fast. This is just help you, all right? McLaren said this. He said, our habitual interpretation and application of John 14:6 reveals our captivity to white Christian supremacy and colonizing imperial religion. Good Lord. That's a lot. That's a lot. We use John 14:6 to convince ourselves that God is on our side and not theirs. That God is for us and against everyone else. That we are God's favorites and to hell with everyone else. Armed with that misguided confidence, we have gone into the world and made not disciples, but slaves and converts, not peace, but war, not liberation, but domination. God, can we give an invitation? Old school? Come, let's just get down here and do whatever it is we used to do, because that right there is the message. I am convinced that the reason Christians love John 14:6 is because Christianity has a long history tied into white supremacy. And I don't know if you know this, but Christians need to repent of their Christian privilege. And so what you have are a group of people going, woo, not only are we supreme, but we're not only supreme, check this out, we're the only ones going to heaven. We are the only ones who have the right belief. And then the larger question is, if Jesus is the only way, then what does that actually mean? Because I don't know if you know this too, but within even the Christian world, there are thousands and thousands of different beliefs about Jesus. So which one of those beliefs are the ones that actually get you in? Which one is the right way? These are all questions that we ask when we talk about John 14:6. The question is, this idea that this is a proof text to exclude anyone who isn't a Christian. The question is, does this text support that claim? I love what Marcus Borg said. This is great. Marcus Borg said, it does so only if one is profoundly ignorant of the New Testament scholarship of the last 200 years, only if one literalizes the Bible, and finally, only if one knows nothing about the fourth gospel in which alone this text occurs. So, all of that said, I need to give you the context in which this verse happens. If I had time, we don't, I would love to hear your opinion and how you have understood John 14:6. Perhaps maybe how it's been taught to you. But unfortunately, I'm trying to pull for 40 minutes, and we got to get going, all right? So let me give you a little historic context, and then we'll read John 14:6 in its proper context, all right? First of all, the book of John's written scholarship says somewhere between 95 and 110 Common Era. This gospel was not just written to like a void. And also, by the way, wasn't written to Christians in Mableton in 2024, just to be clear, all right? It wasn't written to evangelicals in the 1900s, all right? That's not what these are written to real people in real times and real places that are actually walking through real things, okay? Now, I think you can relate a lot to maybe what's happening in the book of John. So let me explain. John is written to a group of Jews, all right? But not just any Jews. John is written to a group of Jews who have found in their Judaism, they have found in Jesus a new way to connect with Yahweh. Or we might say like this. This is a particular group of Jews who have found a new path in Jesus to connect to the divine. Let me just stop there. How do you connect to the divine? In what ways do you connect with the divine? Now, many of you already in here are like, I connect to God in many ways. Yeah, I know. This particular group has found that they connect with the divine most when they are looking at the life of Jesus. They have found in Jesus a new way to connect with the divine. Now, all that said, you need to know something that happened in 88 Common Era, okay? In 88 CE, there were what I would use this phrase, Orthodox Jews, or those who were like in Judaism that were committed to Judaism, all right? So think of like these Orthodox Jews. John refers to them only as, hang with me, quote, the Jews, all right? That's how John writes about them, or whoever's writing John, the Jews. So if you're reading John, it's easy to walk away from John going, God. And by the way, this has happened especially in modern times right now. John, the book of John, has been used for a lot of anti-Semitic beliefs. And there are a lot of evangelicals and a lot of Christians who have leveraged John as an anti-Semitic text because they don't know anything about the actual context. And if you don't know anything about the context, you go into these letters and you're like, look, it's right there. John talks about the Jews, all right? Yes, specifically, when he talks about the Jews, he's talking about more Orthodox Jews. So there are two groups that John is dealing with right now, okay? You have the Orthodox Jews, and then you have, and here's the language I'm giving, the revisionist Jews, or the Jews that are like, we're in Judaism, we're committed to Judaism, but then there are Jews that are like, we're in Judaism, we're committed to Judaism, but we also feel like there's something new happening and we're trying to follow it, and we found it in the life of Jesus, and this also seems to be leading us to the divine. So you can imagine, hang with me, I'm just going to take some imagination, okay? But you can imagine the Orthodox Jews going, no, that's heresy. We have the way, we know the way, and this is the way. You are betraying your ancestors, the Torah and the law and Moses. But then you have these revisionist Jews going, yeah, but you don't understand. We're experiencing the divine in this amazing way through this man Jesus. It's quite phenomenal. Come join us, all right? And so in 88 CE, the more Orthodox Jews, which John calls the Jews, had enough. They had enough. They were like, this is my translation. Wish I think you would have figured that out. They were like, these, quote, progressive, quote, Jews, going out, finding a new way to God. It is New Age. It's heresy. It's backwards, and it's against the Bible. All right? Do you know anything about that? Have you experienced anything like that? Have you ever had like religious gatekeepers upset at the way you understand Jesus? Have you ever had like religious gatekeepers upset at the way you live your life? Have you ever had anyone tell you that because you're a part of Vining's Lake, you're going to hell? Have you ever been told you're going to hell? Is it phenomenal to you? Does anyone else scratch their head at this? I've had people look me in my face and tell me I'm going to hell, but they do it with a smile. Is there any love that is as loving as Christian hate? And you know the phrase, you heard it all the time, oh, bless your heart. Like, I hope you know I hear what you're saying when you say that, right? Like, I'm telling you, I have met so many Christians that are like, you can't deviate from this. Now, hear me when I say this. They'll stand their ground. This is as narrow as it gets. But when push comes to shove, what they really mean is, what I mean is exactly the way I believe. If you don't believe the way I believe, you're going to hell. Wow. I have to ask questions. Is the God we see portrayed in the Bible that exclusive? Is the God we've come to know that exclusive? And by the way, if that is true, then here's the thing. There might only be one person in heaven. Which I've said before, if that turns out to be true, then maybe that is heaven, because I'm an introvert and that sounds heavenly. If I die and end up on some remote island and no one's around, I'll be like, thank you, God. This is heaven. I'm here. I've arrived. No humans. And it won't take long, by the way, a year or two, and I'll end up not liking myself. So what happened? 88 Common Era, the Orthodox Jews, or the Jews, as John says, had enough of these revisionist Jews, these progressive Jews, because they kept reinterpreting the Torah. And the Orthodox Jews just had enough. Like, you guys keep going, they kept going back to the Torah, and they were reading it going, check it out. Check this way out. We see it all throughout the Torah. And the Orthodox Jews are like, we should call a meeting. So they call a meeting, and the folks in charge of Judaism, because I don't know if you know this, there's always someone in charge of the religion. And usually they're self-appointed, but they'll say God called them. Do you know what I'm talking about? God spoke to them. I think the most dangerous words in America right now is God told me. Can we just, I'm riffing, if you didn't notice. Can we leave God out of this? Like, every time I hear a politician over their mouth, I'm like, can we do a favor? Can we just not talk about God? Can we do the world a favor and not bring God into all of our beliefs? Can we just own that we believe it? Can we own that this is our political views? Can we not bring God into it? And then, by the way, while I'm at it, can we stop dehumanizing people? Liberals, I'm talking to you. Conservatives, I'm talking to you. Can we stop dehumanizing immigrants? And can we stop dehumanizing police officers? The reason we dehumanize, but I'm telling you, hear me, and I know we're on it, and I'm riffing a little bit, but it's going to be very unlikely that you and I can bring this heaven down to earth if all we do on the other side is mirror the hate on the other side. That is the myth of redemptive violence. It's not going to work for us. Part of the reason I left my fundamentalist upbringing is not so I could become a liberal fundamentalist. I don't want fundamentalism. I don't. Part of the reason I left is because it was so distasteful and so unlike the Christ I saw in Scripture. And so when I walk away now, I'm looking back going, listen, we can't mirror what we're seeing. I think Dr. King, somehow, God, that man knew that. That's why he kept coming back to that idea. He's like, hate's not going to work. It's too heavy a burden to bear. It's just not going to work. We cannot keep mirroring what we see. So what if we took Jesus serious, and what if we met hate with love? Well, imagine that. Imagine what could happen. The Jews had enough. And in 88 CE, they called a meeting. And the Orthodox Jews excommunicated the revisionist Jews. And it became a split. Imagine that. Became a split. And they had to choose. You're either going the path of Moses or you're going the path of this new way, Jesus. But I'm telling you, Moses, the law, this is the way. This new path, this new iteration of Judaism that you are experiencing, it is not of the divine. This is what's transpiring in the book of John. To the point where the Orthodox party went public with this statement. If you are a revisionist Jew, if you follow and believe you can get to God through some other way than the law and the Torah, you are no longer part of the faith of your mothers and fathers. It was the ultimate declaration. Maybe you've experienced that before. Maybe you've had someone tell you that before. The spirituality that you are following is no longer part of the faith of your mothers and fathers, to which is a concern for them, but is a celebration for me. I do not deny it. Yes, you're right. But what I need you to understand is I don't think the divine is confined to one religion. I also don't think God was a Christian. I'll tell you this, I don't think Jesus was a Christian. I love Christians who are like, I'm a Christian because of Jesus. Well, you're doing something wrong because he was a Jew. So you all claim to follow Jesus. If you want to follow Jesus, you need to renounce Christianity and go into Judaism. Are we okay? I still can't believe I say some of the things I say. It's so dumb. All right. So what is John doing? Okay. If you've ever been marginalized or pushed out of a religious environment because you didn't line up or believe what they believed, if you've ever been pushed to the edges, here's what the letter of John is. John, the book of John, he's writing to those people. So John is specifically writing to those who have just been excommunicated from Orthodox Jews. John is saying, I've got something to say to you, and I want to write to them, and this community of these religious Jews are crafting the letter together going, okay, we need to get this information out so that the Orthodox Jews can understand where we're coming from. Okay? So this is what's transpiring in the letter. I want to be very clear too. Jesus wasn't a Christian. Paul wasn't a Christian. John and his community aren't Christians. They're Jews, and they are in Judaism. So when people use this as kind of a Christian versus Judaism argument, or they use it as like an anti-Semitic idea, please hear me. John is not a Christian, and this isn't a fight between Christianity and Judaism. This is a family squabble within Judaism, and there's a big difference, okay? So the family's going at it, and it has just split. Does anyone in here know anything about relational conflict? Does anyone know anything about having beliefs that have caused a rift in your own family? Does anyone in here know anything about like grandparents and folks who've been around for a while, like disown people because of their lifestyle or their beliefs or the past that they have taken? Do you see what I'm saying? In many ways, it's like you have the first century context, but then you have us, and sometimes I like to say, we've evolved, and I look back and we're like, we're still dealing with the same stuff. One writer said this: the excommunicated revisionists fought back with counterclaims. Playing on the Torah's opening chapter, John wrote, by the way, God, first of all, I just saw that we're already past time. Okay. This is a disaster. By the way, think about this. The revisionist Jews are making counterclaims. So what do? Who are they talking to? Orthodox. So what do? They go back to the Torah. They go to the Torah and they're like, okay, we need you to see something. If you've ever read the book of John, do you know how John opens John's book? What does John do? You ever read this and been so confused at John? Many of you are like, this is why I don't read John, because it's so confusing. Check this out. In the beginning was what? The Word. Have you ever read that? What do you know what that is, right? Genesis 1. Do you understand now, even just with that context, why there's so many like actual references to the Old Testament? Do you see what John is doing now? Because in the beginning was God. Oh my God. So John is like, I got an idea. If we're going to make a claim, let's just do this. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Good Lord, what? Orthodox Jews are like, idolatry. In other words, the revisionist Jews were claiming to be more Orthodox than the Orthodox. They're like, you guys think you're so Orthodox and you're so traditional, but what you don't understand is we're actually more traditional than you are. I can't tell you when I read this, like, oh my God, John, deconstructing your faith is not new? No. Other people are like, no, it started with the Reformation. Are you kidding me? It started long before the Reformation. The Reformation is a good example. Long before the Reformation, you already have like John's community, like, guys, I don't know how to tell you this, but I know you claim to have the upper hand, but I need you to know something. We're not deviating from the tradition. This is the tradition. It has always evolved this way. Okay. All of that said, chapter 13 through 17, so we're going to read 14. Chapters 13 through 17 is one giant riff. Okay? It is what is called the farewell discourse. Jesus is having his final supper with his students. In chapter 13, he washes their feet. Do you know that story? He's up in there having a supper, and then he decides to wash the feet. And then he decides to deliver a speech. Okay? So what would you tell someone if you knew you were going to die and this was your last moment? What are you going to talk about? What would you say? Now, I need to pause here and say there are 1,000 ways to read what we're about to read. I'm not giving you something that's brand new. I'm also just giving you one interpretation that fits well with where I am at in my life right now. This could change next week. I didn't believe it a year ago. You understand what I'm saying? There are lots of ways. I can point you, go read Brian McLaren's Is Jesus the Only Way? Go read Richard Rohr's Universal Christ, because Richard Rohr separates Jesus from the Christ. He says Christ is not Jesus' last name. So Richard Rohr believes when that statement is made, no one comes to the Father but through me. He doesn't believe that's coming from the mouth of Jesus. He believes it's coming from the eternal Christ that has always been, which is more consciousness. Okay, so that's one way to read it, all right? There are hundreds of ways to read it. There are a lot of scholarship that says Jesus never, ever actually said that statement. That would never come out of the mouth of Jesus. When you take the text as a whole, there's no way that this is John's community placing it on the mouth of Jesus, all right? And lots of people die on that hill. It feels a little washy to me. Because I don't want to be a group of people that are like, I don't like that in the Bible, so let's just say Jesus didn't say it. You know what I'm saying? No, we don't do that here. Let's get into it. Do you know what I mean? Let's just walk into it. And by the way, I'm willing to bend the truth if it's the truth. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay, maybe not. Here we go. Chapter 13, Jesus in the room. He just washed their feet. And what does he say? His opening point in his farewell discourse is, I give you all a new commandment. First of all, let's just pause there. There's a lot of commandments in the Torah. And you got these progressive revisionists up there reinterpreting the Torah. And what do? Reinterpret it again. And Jesus, being a rabbi, goes back and he's like, look at all those commandments. They're all beautiful. No one's negating that. They're necessary and they're helpful. But I also just want to say to you, I need to give you a new commandment. I love it. If you look at the life of Jesus, it's not uncommon for him to keep using that word new. New. Even the prophets of the old say, new. This is, I give you a new command. What does he say? Love one another. Love one another. Now, there's a lot of things that we can be confused about, but one thing predominantly that most scholarship agrees on, Jesus was very adamant that he came to tell the world that truth. Love God, love your neighbor, love one another, love your enemies. Love. That's it. Jesus says, I give you a new commandment. Love one another. Then, check it out. He gets over toward the end of chapter 13, and he takes questions. So if you've been around Bonnings Lake, you know I've stopped sermons before, or at the beginning of sermons, we're like, let's just take questions, right? Jesus does a question and response time with his students because he's about to leave. So he's like, what do you guys have to say? And 3 questions arise. I'm going to read all 3 questions to you, and then we're only going to get to point 1. All right? When I say point 1, I mean half of the first point, okay? We'll get there, and then we'll answer the second and third question into next week, okay? But there are 3 questions that are asked. Here's the first question. Jesus, where are you going? Second, how can we know the way to where you're going? Third, show us God. Okay? All right. So those are the 3 questions we're going to tackle. Now, let me place this in its context. John 13:36. He just said, I give you a new commandment, love one another. Simon Peter said to him, here's question 1. All right? So imagine they're all sitting there. I love it. They're all sitting there in this room. It's like, talk to me. Talk to me, Peter. Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered. It's so cryptic. Listen to this. Where I'm going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow me afterward. So, is that an answer? I just asked where you're going. He's like, well, where I'm going, you can't go, but you'll get there later. Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not go now? I will lay down my life for you. Jesus answered, will you? I tell you, before the rooster crows, you have denied me 3 times. Peter. God, I was like, Peter's the one who's like, put me on the poster. I'm your guy. Really, Peter? You're the guy? You want the entire world to be like, guys, if you want to know the way, look at Peter. And Peter, man, he's a little bit of pressure. Like, Jesus? Never heard of the guy. Do you remember growing up in the 90s? I don't know, everybody here is of age, most of us. I grew up in the 90s, 80s and 90s. And growing up in the 90s, it was all about like being a martyr for Christ. Do you know what I'm talking about? And I'm making light because there were lots of like actual martyrs. But I became such a big deal growing up in school, in like high school, because Columbine happened. You remember Columbine? And there was a story that came out of Columbine about how the gunman held their head to someone and said, "Are you a Christian?" And then all the youth pastors, the evangelical youth pastors across the world for years started teaching that story. And they'd be like, "Kids, I have a question for you. If someone were to hold a gun to you and said, 'Are you a Christian?' what would you say?" And I just always remember Peter. Peter would immediately have been like, I always said, "I don't know him." Peter, the disciple, would have been like, "No, I'm not. Can you please take the gun out of my face?" You know what I'm saying? Like that. And there was always this guilt, like, will you deny him when you need? And I mean, God, the weight we carried as young evangelical students of like the whole thing's like leaning on us. And then you read like Peter, and he's just like, "I put me on the poster. I got it. I am here. I'll go wherever you lead." And Jesus is just like, "I hear what you say, but just a little bit of pressure, a little bit of fear in your life, and the very first chance you get, you're going to be like, never even heard of the guy. I'm out." Yeah, that's like real life. Okay? All right. He says, "You'll deny me 3 times. Now, flips into 14. Here's what Jesus says. "Do not let your hearts be troubled." He's leaving, remember. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. Now he moves into a metaphor. God, do you see why I couldn't finish this in one Sunday? Here it is. "In my Father's house there are many dwelling places." Or, have you heard this phrase? Poor translation, many mansions. Have you heard this? Yes. Yes. We'll get there. "If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. And you know the way to the place where I am going." Now, insert Thomas. So Peter's already stuck his foot in his mouth. Thomas is like, "Lord, we do not know the place where you are going. How can we know the way?" There's question 2. Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father also. For now on, you know him, and you have seen him." Philip said to him, "Lord," here's question 3, "show us the Father, and we'll be satisfied." Jesus said to him, "I've been with you all this time. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me?" Now let's just stop there. The text goes on and on and on. You know what it eventually gets to? It eventually gets to something mind-blowing that we'll talk about next week. The text goes on and says, he starts with, "What do you mean you've seen the Father? I am in the Father and the Father is in me." And I'm going to go ahead and give it to you now. I'm just going to, spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. It's like Jesus knew these people cannot handle what the mysticism at which I am giving them right now. They're literalizing everything I say. They don't quite get it. So let me just, it's like he knew spiral dynamics and stages of consciousness, because he says, "I'm in the Father and the Father is in me." He's like, they can't handle what I'm actually about to say, so let me just start there. And then he waits, and you'll see next week, he finally comes to the end. He says, "Oh, by the way, I am in the Father and the Father is in me, and you are in me and you are in the Father. We're all intertwined together." But they couldn't handle the "you" part yet. So he's just like, "Yep, you've seen the Father. You've seen me. You've seen the Father." It's also like he's saying, "And if you've looked in the mirror, you've seen the Father." Well, okay. Now, let's get to question 1. This is terrible. Where are you going? Okay. Now I'm going to riff through this really fast. Jesus says, "I am going to my Father. Where I'm going, you cannot go just yet. But you will very soon." Okay? Now, when Jesus uses this phrase, "Where I'm going, you cannot follow me now, but you will," he then shifts into a metaphor. And the metaphor he gives us is a father's house, where there are many dwelling places. Now, when Jesus says, "Where I'm going," let me be very clear, he's talking about his execution. He's talking about his upcoming suffering. He's talking about the truth that he has to go alone. No one can go for him. This is the path he's chosen. And what he's saying is, I'm about to be executed. I'm about to suffer, but do not be discouraged. This is the whole point of the farewell speech. I think Jesus is trying to encourage them. I'm about to leave you, but do not get discouraged. It's going to be easy to get discouraged, but don't get discouraged. Why? Because this isn't the end, but it's the beginning to a new experience with God. I know you have felt close to God around me, and I know you have seen the divine in me and through me, and I know I have been the way to help you experience the divine, but I have to go now. And I think one of the truths of the gospel that has been so overlooked, people always want to talk about the coming of Christ, but few people want to talk about the leaving of Christ. And it's interesting that Jesus seems to have wanted to emphasize that he's leaving over and over and over again. And even at the resurrection tomb, when Mary's about to latch hold, what does Jesus say? Do not touch me. It's almost as if Jesus is wanting you to know it's never really been about me. Get your hands off of me. Why are you latching hold of me? Why would you call yourself a Christian? That's not the point. And yet this is the very text that people take on. It is the point. And Jesus is saying, hey guys, I'm leaving. I'm out. I am heading away. I'm about to be killed and executed. You people, you're going to be here, but I want you to know something. I'm not just leaving you. My death will not end the relationship you had with the divine, but it is about to go into a whole new level. So how do I explain this? Let me give a metaphor that you might know. Do you know when a bride and groom gets married? In the first century, do you know what would happen? People read this, and when they heard this, these writers knew exactly what they were doing. Because what a lot of people don't know is when they read John 14, they think, well, there it is. Look at that. Jesus is about to die, and he said he's going to his Father's house to build mansions for us. So when we die, check it out. It's right there. It's right there in the Bible. We will have a McMansion. And I also just want to cringe going, how have you confused the kingdom of God with the American dream? And how shallow of a civilization have we become? I'm talking to myself. How shallow of a civilization have we become that our ultimate utopia is a mansion? If that's it, I don't know how to tell you this, we can get that here. You can. Just rob a bank. You can do it. You can do it if you want to. You can get it. Take the best house you know with a mansion, and then you'll get there. I don't know how to tell you this, but you won't be satisfied. I mean, you will for a little while. If it's at the beach, maybe longer than you think. But ultimately, you won't be. You won't be. That's the American dream. It's like, and we used to sing about it growing up. Did you all? A mansion over the hillside? I think it was a hymn. I still go to funerals and feel like, woo, woo, I'm going to get my mansion. And then they played on it because they used to say some will have mansions, but not all. Some of y'all are going to have shacks because you listen to secular music. Do you know? You smoke cigarettes. I don't want to be pretentious or if you're here and you believe that, I should say this. I got to check in my soul just for a second. I can come across that way sometimes. My apologies. I did grow up evangelical, so it's hard not to go there. But let me say this. If you're in here and that's what you believe, hang on to that. I'll say it like this. If a mansion in heaven is what brings you hope right now, I'm not here to take your hope away. Hang on to it. Keep it. But I also have to be true to this story to go, this is not remotely close to what is actually happening right now in this text. This is not about a mansion in heaven. We used to sing about it. It was in the hymns, but then it got translated in the contemporary world too. There was a group called Audio Adrenaline. Anybody ever remember that group? I used to go to Christian festivals where they would like mosh pit, everything, going on Christian festivals. Supertones. You ever heard of the Supertone? Like, I was deep in this Christian subculture. And Audio Adrenaline had a song called Big House. Big house with lots and lots of room where we can play football. And as a teenager, I remember, that's where I'm going. That's where I'm going. And all of it was based out of this text. So let me just give you this. And Jesus referred to his Father's house. This is not about or a reference to a mansion in heaven. This is a metaphor for the presence of God. Let me repeat that. When Jesus talks about his Father's house, this is not about a mansion in heaven. This is a metaphor for the presence of God. Because when Jesus referred to his Father's house earlier in the book of John, let's just take chapter 2, verse 16, what was he talking about? He was not talking about a mansion in heaven. When he talked about his Father's house, what was he talking about? He was actually talking about the temple. Over and over again, when Jesus says, my Father's house, my Father's house, my Father's house, when he referenced his Father's house, he was talking about the actual temple. And so what he was saying is, Jesus is referring in this moment to, okay, earlier, the temple, chapter 2, verse 16. Now, check this out, the temple is gone. And the temple was the place for the Orthodox Jews where the divine and the human came together. If you wanted to meet God, if you wanted to be in the presence of God, you had to go to a specific location, the church. And isn't it interesting how the gatekeepers haven't deviated much from that? Those who are steeped in getting their salaries from religion need you to know if you want God, you have to come within their church. And then we get even more specific to say, if you want the real true God, you have to come to my church. Because there are gods, but then there's the true God. And if you want to touch the true God, then you need to come here. This is where the divine and the human came together. But now the temple's gone. And so what is it possibly that Jesus could be saying here? You fast forward a little bit later, and Jesus refers in John to the temple being rebuilt in 3 days. Well, what is that a reference to? He will die, 3 days later be resurrected. So check out the evolution. Temple with form and boundaries to, okay, now we have in Jesus not just meeting the divine in the temple, but apparently the divine and the human also come together in a body named Jesus. Fast forward, Jesus says that temple's going down too. The first temple went down, the second temple's about to go down. And it's going down, but 3 days later, check it out, 3 days later, he's referring to his body. John is now giving an image about after the death. And now it makes sense a little more. When Jesus says, you can't come with me now, this is a question of like, where are you going? I'm going to the presence of the divine, but I want you to know, just as the Orthodox Jews teach and speak that the divine and the human come together only within the context of the temple, there is no other way to God than the temple. Jesus comes along and he's like, I want you to know that temple went down because why? We tried to confine it to this narrow space that you can meet the divine. And it's like the divine's like, are you kidding me? Much larger than that. Down with the temple. And here we are again looking at Jesus going, this is the way we get to God right here. Guess what? That body goes down too. So you can imagine those are like, whoa, so where do we go now? What do we do now? And what Jesus is saying is, I need you not to get discouraged. I am about to leave. But as I go, I want you to know you're not losing access to the divine. That actually, check this out. Where I'm going, aka presence of God, there's a lot of room. Isn't it interesting how evangelicals are like, give me John 14:6, but very, very few want John 14, 1, 2, and 3. Talk to me about those many rooms. Just how large is the space that you can meet the divine in? Well, apparently there are many spaces and many rooms. And what these writers are doing is they're trying to show you. And this is what happens, all right? As Jesus progresses, he says, let me explain to you the best way I can of what I'm talking about. I need to give you a metaphor. Now, we read this and most of us probably wouldn't know much about this, but some of us may have picked up on this. This is actually a wedding metaphor. It's a nod to kind of wedding language in the first century. So let me give you this. He's using bride and groom language, because what would happen is when the groom would come to the bride to be engaged, he would say, check it out, they would start their betrothing period, and as they would do that, the groom would leave, all right? And the groom would leave, and what they did, because they didn't like get married and then like come together and go build a beach house somewhere. In the first century, when they got engaged, the groom would immediately leave and he would go back, check it out, to his family's space. And they would go back to the space, and the father and the son would begin to kind of like build room, create space for this new bride to come live after they actually get married. So what's the big deal? Follow me. This is a reference to Sinai. What happened at Sinai? Now, you are all master students. Don't look at me sideways. You know what I mean? Like, some of you are like, I've never heard this. Yeah, you have your master students, right? Sinai, you know what Sinai is, right? Sinai is Moses goes up on the mountain where he gets the law. Arguably, the Orthodox Jews would say that's where the divine and the human came together for the first time. So Jesus is giving wedding language, and he's like, okay, I want you to know, check this out. This is just like Sinai. Sinai was seen as a, check it out, wedding ceremony where God and Israel came together for the first time, okay? You could also say, as God and Israel came together, Jesus is saying, I want you to see this, the divine and the human are coming together. So when John has Jesus using wedding language, he's saying the universal realization of the divine and the human is more alive than it's ever been. And just because I'm leaving doesn't mean there's an interruption in that relationship. In fact, I don't know how to tell you this, but there's actually a lot of space in the presence of God. And I also don't know how to tell you this, but I somehow have got to try to figure this out. When I leave, you're not just leaving you with no access to the divine. I know you have found it in me, but I also want you to know, keep reading, keep reading, keep reading, keep reading, keep reading, get down to verse 17, and here's what John 14:17 says. Let me introduce you to the Spirit. Now, there's a whole conversation we could have about the Spirit. If you grew up Pentecostal, you're like, I know all about her. The Spirit will lead you into all truth. And listen to this. But you know him because he lives with you now and later will be in you. Do you understand when I say, if you're having like a little bit of complication going, it's just all real heavy, I don't know that I'm fully grasping it. Yeah. That's why I said, John, this community is like very, like they're mystics before the mystics came along. Like, what are you saying? Yes. I know you always like, God's with you. God's actually in you. Inside of you. I know the Orthodox Jews keep saying the divine and the human can only come together in a temple. And I know you've seen the divine and the human come together in me. But I'm going to the presence of the divine. And I'm about to leave you. Don't get discouraged. Because check it out. A divine presence is really wide. And there's a lot of space. So much so that the divine doesn't just dwell in a temple, and the divine doesn't just dwell in Jesus. The divine actually dwells in you. So, what would Paul sometime later go, you are a temple? Yes. Yes. Yes, that's it. That's exactly what is happening here. This is a move away from temple as building to a temple as the body. The image of temple shifted to a singular person, Jesus. In chapter 14, this movement continues and extends beyond one person to a group of people in a household relationship. 2 quotes and we're out of here. I failed today. Forgive me, Father, for I've sinned. The action of Jesus going to the Father is simultaneously the action when he prepares the space for his disciples. The Father's house will no longer be made of stones, but a household of relationships where the divine will dwell. So when Jesus says, I will come again and get you, this isn't about a second coming. When Jesus says, I'll come again, he's referencing his own resurrection. He is saying, I want you to know something. I'm about to leave you, but I'm not going to leave you abandoned. Please hear me. When I leave you, the divine is here. The divine is coming, and this coming is in a new form that's actually formless. Let's just call it the Paraclete or Spirit. It's all around you. It's invisible. It's also all in you. You see that? Everywhere you go, there's the divine. Well, you say, man, I don't have to go to church anymore? I know that's how we shrink them here. You don't. You actually don't. If the reason you're coming to church is because you think this is the only place you can meet the divine, let me liberate you. Walk outside. Look up at the solar eclipse with glasses. Stare at a tree. My wife and I got home from a trip. We just pulled into the driveway last night. I walked into my front door and stopped and went, do you smell that? She's like, oh my God, I do. I look over, and our entire garage, it's finally spread jasmine. Do you know the smell of jasmine? It is the smell of the kingdom of God. I sat outside with my luggage just going, sounds so silly. I'm about to finish this sermon in exactly 1 minute. And when I do, check it out. I'm going home. You know what I'll do? To get into the house, you have to go through a doorway. In that doorway is jasmine. You can't not come to my house and not smell jasmine. You come to my house, you're going to walk through and just, God, it's going to make the endorphins start flowing. When you walk in my house, you can be if you're in a bad mood, let me give you my address. You're in a bad mood on Monday, tomorrow you get up, you come around to my house, you walk in, the moment you walk in, you'll walk in the house like, God, I was so angry, but I feel delightful. Yeah. It's close here. Jesus is reassuring them their place in the family of God. This is not about going up to dwell in heaven. This is about the divine coming down to dwell in humans. Jesus wasn't talking about a mansion in heaven. He was talking about a place of belonging in the family of God. And everything I just told you is the lead up to John 14:6.